Okay, in this video we're going to be looking at how the policy mix can be used to achieve external stability, equity in the distribution of income, and improve living standards. So in terms of external stability, we've talked about this in the past, but monetary policy is no longer used to target external stability. And the problem with that is, for example, if we increase interest rates, that can lead to less import spending, which is good for the CAD, but it will also appreciate the dollar, which is bad for the CAD. So whether we tighten or loosen monetary policy, it's not going to be effective at targeting external stability. So if you do get a question about how the policy mix is being used to achieve external stability, I suggest you just start your answer by, first of all, defining external stability, and then explaining that monetary policy is not effective because of the fact that it has an uncertain impact on the CAD. So therefore, external stability is left to budgetary and supply side policies. First of all, when you're talking about budgetary policies, you can talk about how the fact that if the government can reduce its section of net foreign debt, so if they were able to achieve budget surpluses, that should help to reduce the government section of public sector debt, and therefore help to reduce our overall level of net foreign debt. So any policies that is contractionary can have a positive impact on net foreign debt. So within this year's budget, you could talk about taxing multinationals at a higher rate. You could talk about the higher excess tax because they're going to have contractionary impacts on spending, but also help to reduce public sector debt. So in terms of a good answer about how the current government policy mix is being used to target external stability, you can talk about how the government is pursuing fiscal consolidation, which will help to reduce public sector debt. However, it's been quite a relaxed approach to this, and they have been less, I suppose, contractionary this year, which could mean that the government debt continues to grow. It's now above $300 billion, and that's going to lead to higher public sector debt and have negative implications for our ability to pay off our obligations to other countries. So the smaller deficits demonstrate some commitment to reducing our government debt, and the more contractionary budget should help to reduce spending and debits in the CAD, but it's a very mildly contractionary budget. Then you want to talk about some policies. So first, you've said that defined external stability, you've explained that monetary policy is ineffective, you've talked about how the stance is helping to reduce public sector debt in a mild fashion. Then you can talk about how specific policies, so from this year's budget, you can talk about the Beef Roads program and how that's helping to give access to Australian exporters to markets because they're more productive. You could talk about the lower company tax rates and how that will stimulate investment and productivity going forward as specific policies within this year's budget, and then link that to the fact that will reduce pressure on the CAD because we're more productive, so we'll have more credits in our balance of merchandise trade. Then finally, you want to talk about supply side policies. So within supply side policies, I'll be talking about two things. I'll be talking about our recent free trade agreements because that's very relevant in relation to external stability. So you can talk about how the Chinese and Japanese free trade agreements will help to give us access to world markets. We'll be able to export more, and that will help to reduce the CAD because we will have more access. Although you could also mention the negatives that we may import more because imports will be come with lower tariffs. You could also talk about the idea of immigration and the use of 457 visas and how they help to boost our productivity and lower real unit labour costs and also lead to more credits in the balance of trade. So within that answer, you've got defining external stability, explaining how monetary policy is ineffective, talking about the stance of budgetary policy and how that helps, talking about specific budgetary policy initiatives and how they help, and then finishing that off with a link to how the signing of the free trade agreement and recent immigration policy can also help external stability. In terms of equity, I won't go into living standards in this video, I'll keep it short. First of all, define what equity is. And basically, when you're looking at equity, any expansionary budgetary policy or monetary policy initiatives can help because it should help to increase the level of employment, which means less people are on welfare going forward. Generally, because monetary policy can't target particular sectors of the economy, it's less effective in targeting equity, and therefore it's largely left up to budgetary policy. So, measures that can be used to improve equity, again, you want to have a really big focus on this year's budget. Sorry about that. So you could talk about the fact that this year's budget will have a mixed impact on equity. So you've got things like the excise tax on cigarettes, freezing Medicare, delaying childcare subsidies, and the tax cuts really only being for those earning over $80,000 as negative impacts on equity. But then there's also benefits in that they've got the youth jobs program, you've got the tax concessions for, reduction in tax concessions for high income earners and things like that, which would help to lower the Gini coefficient. And then once you've talked about budgetary policy, you can make some link to the fact that supply side policies within the budget, like the youth jobs path program, will also help to boost equity. But you don't want to talk too much about things like 457 visas and trade liberalisation, because they can often have negative impacts for equity. So it's important that you recognise in your answers that supply-side policies aren't used as often because the impact on equity can be a little bit controversial. It can be negative in the sense that trade liberalisation leads to more importing, and the use of 457 visas can lead to more structural unemployment. So question on the current policy mix, how it's being used to achieve equity. Define equity as your goal. Explain that monetary policy only has some impact in terms of the fact that it can boost growth and employment, but it can't target particular sectors of the economy. Talk about how budgetary policy is the main weapon. Then focus on both positive and negatives from this year's budget. So you've got your negatives in terms of the higher excise taxes, the freezing of Medicare, the tax cuts for high income earners. Then talk about the positives in the terms of the Youth Jobs Program and tax concessions on super. And then finish your answer by explaining why supply-side policies are less effective, because things like trade liberalisation and immigration policy can lead to more structural unemployment. And you've got a really well-rounded answer in terms of why certain policies are more effective than others and what the government's currently doing to improve and potentially hurt equity.